Marcus Thompson stood at attention outside Buckingham Palace, his marine dress uniform crisp and perfect under the London morning sun. The 28-year-old had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. He was here as part of a special honor guard exchange program between the United States Marines and the British Royal Guard. The palace gates towered before him, ornate and imposing. Tourists gathered behind the barriers, cameras clicking constantly as they tried to capture the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Marcus had watched this same ceremony on television as a child, never imagining he would one day stand among these legendary soldiers. His commanding officer, Colonel Harrison, had selected him personally for this assignment. "Thompson, you represent not just the Marines but America itself," the colonel had said during the briefing back at Camp Pendleton. "The Royal Guard has traditions going back centuries. Show them what American discipline looks like." Marcus felt the weight of that responsibility now as he observed the British guards around him. They stood motionless, their red tunics and bearskin hats creating an impressive sight. These men were known worldwide for their unwavering discipline and ability to remain perfectly still regardless of what happened around them. The exchange program was designed to foster military cooperation between the two nations. For 1 week, Marcus would train alongside the Royal Guard, learning their protocols and traditions. In return, he would share modern Marine tactics and training methods. It was an honor few Marines ever received. As the morning progressed, Marcus noticed something that troubled him. During the ceremony, a small child had wandered away from her parents and was now crying loudly near the palace gates. The tourists seemed oblivious, focused only on taking pictures. The little girl, no more than 4 years old, was clearly scared and looking for her family. The Royal Guards maintained their positions, eyes forward, completely motionless. Marcus understood their discipline. He had been briefed extensively on their protocols. They were not permitted to break formation or acknowledge distractions during official duties. This was part of what made them legendary. But as a Marine, Marcus had been trained differently. His core values included protecting the innocent, especially children. Every fiber of his being told him to help the lost child, even though he knew it would mean breaking protocol in front of thousands of witnesses and television cameras broadcasting the ceremony worldwide. The little girl's cries grew louder. She was wearing a bright yellow dress and clutching a small teddy bear. Her face was red from crying, and she kept turning in circles, calling for her mommy. The crowd seemed to treat her distress as part of the spectacle, with some people actually taking pictures of her tears. Marcus felt his jaw clench. In Afghanistan, he had helped countless children in similar situations. The idea of standing motionless while a child suffered went against everything he believed in as a soldier and as a human being. He glanced at the British guards beside him. Their faces showed no emotion, no acknowledgement of the situation unfolding just meters away. The ceremony was being broadcast live on BBC and several international news channels. Marcus knew that millions of people around the world were watching. Any deviation from protocol would be seen by countless viewers and would likely create an international incident. The exchange program itself could be jeopardized by his actions. His military training warred with his conscience. On one hand, he was a guest in this country, representing his nation and his corps. Breaking formation would be seen as disrespectful to his hosts and could damage diplomatic relations. On the other hand, a child needed help, and he was in a position to provide it. The little girl stumbled and fell, scraping her knee on the pavement. Her cries became more desperate, and still no one moved to help her. The tourists continued taking pictures, treating the entire scene as entertainment. Marcus felt his heart rate increase as he struggled with the decision that could define not just his career, but his character. He thought about his own younger sister back home in Ohio. Sarah was about the same age as this little girl when she had gotten lost at a shopping mall years ago. Marcus remembered how terrified his family had been during those 20 minutes before they found her. He remembered the relief on his mother's face when a kind security guard brought Sarah back to them. The protocol was clear: maintain position at all costs. But Marcus's moral compass pointed in a different direction. He had sworn an oath to protect and serve, and that oath didn't come with geographic limitations or ceremonial exceptions. A child in distress was a child in distress, whether in Afghanistan or London. The Royal Guard Sergeant Major stood nearby, his face stone-like as he supervised the ceremony. Marcus knew that any movement would be seen immediately, and the consequences would be swift. The British military took their ceremonial duties extremely seriously, and any disruption would be viewed as a grave breach of military courtesy. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus felt the internal struggle intensify. The little girl had now been crying for nearly 10 minutes, and her distress was clearly visible to everyone present. Yet the ceremony continued as if nothing was happening. This was the reality of military discipline. The mission always came first, regardless of personal feelings or external circumstances. But Marcus had not joined the Marines to stand motionless while others suffered. He had enlisted to make a difference, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The uniform he wore was supposed to represent honor, courage, and commitment, values that seemed to demand action in this situation. The moment of decision was approaching. In just a few seconds, Marcus would either maintain his position like a proper soldier, or he would break centuries of protocol to help a crying child. The choice would echo through his military career and potentially affect international relations between two allied nations. As he stood there, feeling the eyes of the world upon him, Marcus Thompson prepared to make the most important decision of his military career. The little girl's cries continued to pierce the morning air, and time seemed to slow as Marcus weighed duty against conscience, protocol against humanity. Marcus Thompson's decision came in an instant that would change everything. Despite the weight of protocol and the eyes of millions watching, he couldn't ignore the crying child any longer. With deliberate steps that broke centuries of ceremonial tradition, he left his position and walked toward the little girl in the yellow dress. The crowd's reaction was immediate and electric. Gasps rippled through the thousands of tourists gathered outside Buckingham Palace. Camera phones turned toward Marcus as he knelt beside the frightened child. The professional photographers and television crews scrambled to capture this unprecedented moment, a soldier-breaking formation during one of Britain's most sacred ceremonies. The little girl looked up at Marcus with tear-filled eyes, still clutching her teddy bear. Her face was streaked with tears and her small body shook with each sob. Marcus smiled gently and spoke in a soft voice that somehow carried over the murmur of the crowd. "Hey there, sweetheart. What's your name?" he asked, his Marine training in dealing with distressed civilians kicking in automatically. The child hiccuped and whispered something too quiet for others to hear. But Marcus nodded encouragingly. The royal guards remained in their positions, though Marcus could sense the tension radiating from them. Their discipline was absolute, but he knew they were aware of every detail of what was happening beside them. The sergeant major's face had gone rigid, his jaw set in a way that promised serious consequences. Marcus gently took the little girl's hand and began looking around for her parents. The crowd had grown larger as word spread that something unusual was happening at the palace. Social media was already buzzing with videos and photos of the American Marine who had broken protocol to help a child. Within moments, Marcus heard a woman's desperate voice calling out, "Emma, Emma, where are you?" A young mother pushed through the crowd, her face panic-stricken as she searched for her daughter. When she saw Marcus kneeling with the little girl, relief flooded her features. "Mommy," the child cried out, and Marcus helped her to her feet. The reunion was emotional. The mother swept her daughter into her arms, tears streaming down her face. She turned to Marcus with gratitude that needed no words. "Thank you so much," she managed to say between tears. "I only looked away for a second and she was gone. I've been searching everywhere." The mother was clearly a tourist, her accent suggesting she was from northern England, visiting London with her family. Marcus nodded respectfully. "Just glad she's safe, ma'am. You might want to keep a closer eye on her near the crowds." His words were kind but carried the authority of someone who had seen too many dangerous situations involving children. As the mother and daughter disappeared back into the crowd, Marcus turned to face the consequences of his actions. The ceremony had continued around him, but he knew that his breach of protocol had been noted by every official present. The British guards had maintained their positions, but their silence felt different now, charged with unspoken judgment. The sergeant major approached Marcus with measured steps. His face was unreadable, but his posture conveyed barely controlled anger. This was a man who had dedicated his life to military precision and ceremonial perfection, And Marcus had just shattered both in front of the world's media. "Corporal Thompson," the sergeant major said in a clipped British accent that could cut glass, "you will report to the commanding officer immediately following this ceremony. Your breach of protocol will be addressed through proper channels." Marcus stood at attention and replied formally, "Yes, Sergeant Major, understood." He felt no regret for his actions, but he understood the gravity of the situation. His decision to help the child had been the right thing to do, but it had also created an international incident. The remaining minutes of the ceremony passed in tense silence. Marcus resumed his position, but he could feel the stares of tourists and the weight of cameras still focused on him. His phone, secured in his quarters, was undoubtedly receiving countless messages as news of the incident spread around the globe. When the ceremony finally concluded, Marcus was immediately escorted to a private office within the palace complex. The room was austere but elegant, with portraits of past monarchs looking down from the walls. The weight of history seemed to press down on him as he waited for the inevitable confrontation. Colonel Harrison, his American commanding officer, was already present when Marcus arrived. The colonel's face was grave, and Marcus could see the disappointment in his eyes. This was not how the exchange program was supposed to unfold. "Thompson," Colonel Harrison began, his voice heavy with frustration, "do you understand what you've done? This program took years to arrange. The diplomatic implications of your actions could affect military cooperation between our nations for decades." Marcus remained at attention, but replied honestly, "Sir, I understand the consequences of my actions, but I couldn't stand by while a child was in distress. My oath as a Marine includes protecting the innocent, regardless of circumstances." The British commanding officer, Colonel Whitmore, entered the room. He was a distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that had seen decades of military service. His presence filled the room with an authority that commanded instant respect. "Gentlemen," Colonel Whitmore said, his voice carrying the refinement of generations of British military tradition, "we have a situation that requires careful handling. The media is already calling this everything from humanitarian heroism to diplomatic disaster. The palace is receiving hundreds of calls from news organizations around the world." Marcus felt the weight of his decisions settling on his shoulders. He had acted on instinct and moral conviction, but the ripple effects were spreading far beyond what he had anticipated. His simple act of kindness toward a lost child had somehow become an international incident with potential diplomatic ramifications. Colonel Whitmore continued, "The Royal Guard has maintained its ceremonial traditions for over 350 years. These traditions represent more than mere pageantry. They embody the discipline, dedication, and unwavering commitment that defines our military heritage. What happened today challenges the very foundation of what we stand for." The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation became clear. Marcus had not just broken protocol. He had challenged an institution that was woven into the fabric of British military and cultural identity. His actions had forced a confrontation between rigid tradition and human compassion, with the whole world watching to see which would prevail. The silence in the room stretched uncomfortably as Colonel Whitmore studied Marcus with calculating eyes. Outside, the sound of London traffic seemed muted compared to the tension within the palace walls. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat as he waited for judgment to fall upon his decision. "However," Colonel Whitmore continued, and Marcus detected a subtle shift in his tone, "there is another perspective to consider. The Royal Guard exists to serve and protect the Crown and the people of Britain. Today you protected a British child when no one else would act." Colonel Harrison looked surprised by this statement. The entire briefing process had emphasized the absolute nature of ceremonial protocol. There had been no mention of exceptions or alternative interpretations of duty. Colonel Whitmore walked to the window overlooking the palace courtyard where tourists still gathered, many of them discussing the morning's events. "I've been in the Royal Guard for 32 years, Thompson. I've stood through rain, snow, heat waves, and every manner of distraction you can imagine. I've seen guards maintain their positions while people collapsed nearby, during medical emergencies and even during security threats." Marcus remained at attention, unsure where this conversation was leading. The colonel's words could be building toward either commendation or condemnation. "But I've also seen what happens when military tradition becomes so rigid that it loses sight of its original purpose," Colonel Whitmore continued. We guard this palace and maintain these ceremonies because we serve the people. When serving the people conflicts with serving the ceremony, which should take priority? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus felt compelled to answer honestly. Sir, in my opinion, serving the people must always come first. The ceremony exists because of the people, not the other way around. Colonel Harrison shifted uncomfortably. As Marcus's commanding officer, he was responsible for any diplomatic fallout from this incident. Colonel Whitmore, with respect, the Marine Corps takes responsibility for Corporal Thompson's actions. We understand if this ends the exchange program. Colonel Whitmore turned from the window with what might have been the hint of a smile. Actually, Colonel, I think this incident provides us with an opportunity to examine something far more important than ceremonial protocol. It forces us to confront the question of what military honor truly means in the modern world. A knock at the door interrupted the conversation. An aide entered and whispered something to Colonel Whitmore. The colonel's eyebrows rose slightly and he nodded before dismissing the aide. Gentlemen, it seems the situation has developed beyond our immediate control. The video of Thompson's actions has gone viral on social media. The hashtag Marine Compassion is trending worldwide. The palace has received over 3,000 messages in the past hour, with the vast majority supporting the corporal's decision. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and concern. Public support was gratifying, but he knew that popular opinion didn't always align with military justice or diplomatic necessity. Colonel Whitmore continued, "More significantly, we've received a personal message from Her Majesty expressing her thoughts on the matter. She has requested a private audience with Corporal Thompson this afternoon." The room fell completely silent. A personal audience with the Queen was unprecedented for a foreign soldier of Marcus's rank. Even Colonel Harrison looked stunned by this development. "Sir," Marcus managed to say, "I'm not sure I understand. An audience with Her Majesty about a breach of protocol?" "The Queen's message was quite specific," Colonel Whitmore replied. She said, and I quote, "Any soldier who would risk his career to protect a child is exactly the kind of person who should be guarding my home." End quote. Colonel Harrison's expression transformed from concern to amazement. "Colonel, are you saying that Her Majesty approves of what happened?" "I'm saying that Her Majesty understands the difference between blind obedience and principled service. The Royal Guard's ultimate loyalty is to the Crown, and the Crown has spoken." Colonel Whitmore's words carried the weight of centuries of royal authority. Marcus felt overwhelmed by this unexpected turn of events. He had prepared himself for court-martial, disciplinary action, and the end of his military career. Instead, he was being summoned to meet the most famous monarch in the world. "However," Colonel Whitmore added, his tone becoming more serious, "this situation has created challenges that extend beyond personal approval. The media attention has turned this into a global story about military tradition versus human compassion. How we handle this will set precedents for years to come." Outside the window, Marcus could see news vans arriving at the palace gates. Reporters were setting up cameras and preparing for live broadcasts. What had started as a simple act of kindness was rapidly becoming an international media event. "Sir, what exactly does this mean for the exchange program?" Colonel Harrison asked. "And for Thompson's future in the Corps?" Colonel Whitmore sat down behind an ornate desk that had probably witnessed countless military discussions over the decades. "That depends largely on how we choose to frame this incident. We can treat it as a disciplinary matter that reinforces the absolute nature of military protocol. Or we can use it as an opportunity to demonstrate that true military excellence includes the wisdom to know when rigid adherence to rules serves the greater good, and when it doesn't." Marcus realized that his split-second decision to help a crying child had accidentally created a moment of institutional reflection for two of the world's most prestigious military organizations. The question was no longer just about his actions, but about the very nature of military service in the modern world. "The Royal Guard has always prided itself on unwavering discipline," Colonel Whitmore continued. "But discipline without purpose becomes mere theater. Today, Thompson reminded us that the highest form of military discipline is the courage to do what's right, even when it comes at personal cost." The aide returned and whispered another update to Colonel Whitmore. The colonel nodded and turned back to Marcus and Colonel Harrison. "The Queen's private secretary has confirmed the audience for 3 p.m. today. Thompson, you'll meet with Her Majesty to discuss your actions and their implications for military service." This is not a disciplinary hearing. It's a conversation about the values that should guide those who serve. Marcus felt the surreal nature of the situation washing over him. He had joined the Marines to serve his country and protect others. Now, because he had acted on those very principles, he was about to have tea with the Queen of England to discuss the philosophy of military service. Colonel Harrison looked like he was still processing the dramatic shift in circumstances. "Colonel Whitmore, I have to ask, is this typical of how the Royal Guard handles protocol violations?" Colonel Whitmore stood and straightened his uniform. "Colonel Harrison, in 3 decades of service, I've never seen anything like this situation. But then again, I've never seen a soldier risk everything for a stranger's child either. Perhaps it's time for the Royal Guard to learn something new about what true honor looks like." At precisely 3 p.m., Marcus Thompson found himself walking through corridors of Buckingham Palace that few people ever see. The ornate hallways were lined with priceless paintings and artifacts representing centuries of British history. His marine dress uniform had been inspected 3 times, and his shoes polished to mirror brightness, but nothing could calm the nervous energy coursing through him. The Queen's private secretary, a distinguished gentleman named Sir Geoffrey, led Marcus through the palace with practiced efficiency. "Her Majesty is quite looking forward to this conversation, Corporal Thompson. She has followed the reports of this morning's events with considerable interest." Marcus tried to process the surreal nature of his situation. 12 hours ago, he had been a relatively unknown Marine participating in a ceremonial exchange. Now he was about to meet one of the most famous people in the world to discuss his decision to break military protocol for a crying child. They arrived at an elegantly appointed sitting room that managed to feel both formal and comfortable. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating furniture that probably cost more than Marcus earned in several years. Fresh flowers adorned side tables, and the room carried the subtle scent of English roses. "Her Majesty will join you momentarily," Sir Geoffrey said, before withdrawing with a respectful bow. Marcus stood at attention, his mind racing through the brief protocol training he had received for this unprecedented meeting. When Queen Elizabeth entered the room, Marcus was struck by her presence. Despite her small stature and advanced age, she carried herself with a dignity and authority that filled the space. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, seemed to assess everything about him in an instant. "Corporal Thompson," she said in the clear, refined voice known around the world, "please be seated. I believe we have much to discuss." Marcus remained standing until she had taken her seat, then sat carefully on the edge of his chair. "Your Majesty, I want to say that I deeply regret any embarrassment my actions may have caused to your guard or your palace." The Queen raised a hand slightly, a gesture that carried surprising authority. "Corporal, I did not ask you here to receive apologies. I asked you here because your actions today raised questions that deserve thoughtful consideration. Tell me, what was going through your mind when you left your position?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "Your Majesty, I saw a frightened child who needed help and no one was moving to assist her. As a Marine, I was trained to protect those who cannot protect themselves. I knew breaking formation would have consequences, but I couldn't stand by while a child suffered." The Queen nodded thoughtfully. "And yet you knew that your actions would likely end your participation in a program that represents a significant honor for any American serviceman. You risked your military career for a stranger's child." "Yes, ma'am. Some things are more important than career advancement." Marcus spoke with quiet conviction, meeting her gaze directly. "Indeed they are," the Queen replied. "I have been surrounded by soldiers my entire life, Corporal Thompson. I have seen men and women who follow orders with absolute precision, who maintain discipline under the most challenging circumstances. But I have also learned to recognize something far rarer: those who understand that true military honor sometimes requires the courage to act against regulation when conscience demands it." Marcus felt both surprise and relief at her words. This conversation was nothing like what he had expected. The Queen continued, "The Royal Guard exists fundamentally to protect what we hold dear: our traditions, our values, our people. Today, you protected one of our children when protocol said you should not. This creates an interesting question about the true purpose of military service." A servant entered quietly and placed a tea service on the table between them. The Queen poured tea with practiced grace, offering Marcus a cup that he accepted with both hands, careful not to spill anything on the priceless furnishings. I have been following the public reaction to your actions, she said, settling back with her own teacup. The response has been quite remarkable. Messages of support from around the world, from military families, from parents who understand what it means to have a child in distress. Marcus sipped his tea, trying to process the surreal nature of discussing social media trends with the Queen of England. Your Majesty, I never intended for this to become a public spectacle. I was just trying to help. Of course you were, but sometimes our simplest actions have the most profound consequences. Your decision has sparked a global conversation about the balance between institutional discipline and individual conscience. That conversation is long overdue. The Queen set down her teacup and looked directly at Marcus. I have ruled for over 70 years, Corporal Thompson. I have seen institutions resist change, clinging to tradition even when that tradition no longer serves its original purpose. I have also seen the damage that can result when people abandon principle for the sake of convenience. Marcus listened intently, understanding that he was receiving insights into leadership and service from someone with unparalleled experience. The Royal Guard's traditions are important, she continued. They represent stability, continuity, and unwavering commitment. But if those traditions become so rigid that they prevent us from protecting a child, then we must ask whether we are serving tradition or whether tradition should be serving us. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Sir Geoffrey entered and spoke quietly to the Queen, who nodded before he withdrew. I'm told that Colonel Whitmore is requesting guidance on how to handle your situation moving forward, the Queen said. The palace is receiving unprecedented media attention, and there are calls for both your punishment and your commendation. Marcus felt the weight of uncertainty return. Despite the supportive tone of their conversation, he still didn't know what his future held. The Queen stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the palace grounds where tourists still gathered, many of them discussing the morning's events. Corporal Thompson, I want you to understand something important. The Crown's approval is not given lightly, and it is not given for popular gestures or media attention. It is given for actions that reflect the highest ideals of service. She turned back to face him. Your decision this morning reflected those ideals. You placed the welfare of an innocent child above your own interests, above protocol, above the fear of consequences. That is the kind of character we want in those who serve. Marcus felt a surge of emotion that he struggled to control. Thank you, Your Majesty. That means more than I can express. However, the Queen continued, and Marcus braced himself for the inevitable qualification. Your actions have created a situation that requires careful resolution. The Royal Guard cannot simply abandon its traditions, but neither can it ignore the lesson you have taught us today. She returned to her seat and picked up her teacup. I have asked Colonel Whitmore to develop new protocols that preserve the dignity and discipline of the Royal Guard, while allowing for appropriate response to emergency situations involving public safety. Your actions will become part of our training, not as an example of rule-breaking, but as an example of principled decision-making. Marcus realized that his impulsive decision to help a crying child was about to change centuries of Royal Guard tradition. The responsibility of that realization was almost overwhelming. Furthermore, the Queen added, I am recommending that the exchange program between the Royal Guard and the United States Marines be expanded. There is clearly much our organizations can learn from each other about balancing tradition with adaptability, discipline with compassion. The meeting was drawing to a close, but Marcus knew that its impact would extend far beyond this elegant sitting room. His simple act of kindness had accidentally triggered a fundamental examination of military values and institutional flexibility. 3 days after his meeting with the Queen, Marcus found himself in an unexpected position, training Royal Guards in emergency response protocols. The irony wasn't lost on him that the Marine who had broken their ceremonial rules was now helping to rewrite them. The training ground behind Buckingham Palace buzzed with activity as Royal Guards, normally focused on perfecting their ceremonial duties, practiced rapid response scenarios. Marcus stood before a group of 20 guards. Their red tunics exchanged for practical training uniforms, their legendary composure now mixed with genuine curiosity about what they were learning. The key principle, Marcus explained to the assembled guards, is situational awareness without compromising your primary mission. You can maintain ceremonial discipline while still being prepared to respond to genuine emergencies. Sergeant William Hayes, a 10-year veteran of the Royal Guard, raised his hand. Corporal Thompson, how do we determine what constitutes a legitimate emergency versus a distraction that we should ignore? It was a fair question that got to the heart of the challenge they faced. Marcus had spent considerable time over the past few days working with Colonel Whitmore and Royal Guard training specialists to develop practical guidelines. That's exactly the right question. Sergeant, Marcus replied, we've developed a hierarchy of response. Immediate life-threatening situations take priority over ceremonial duties. A child in distress falls into that category, as would medical emergencies, security threats, or dangerous situations involving the public. He gestured to a training scenario set up nearby where dummy figures represented various situations. A person having a medical emergency, a lost child, tourists behaving inappropriately, and simple distractions. The goal isn't to abandon your discipline, Marcus continued. It's to expand your definition of what service means. You're not just guarding a building or performing a ceremony. You're protecting people and representing the highest values of military service. The training had been Colonel Whitmore's idea, endorsed enthusiastically by the Queen after their meeting. Rather than simply updating written protocols, they decided to create practical training that would help guards make split-second decisions when faced with situations like the one Marcus had encountered. Corporal James Mitchell, one of the younger guards, looked skeptical. But what about tradition? The Royal Guard has maintained its protocols for centuries. Are we saying that was wrong? Marcus appreciated the question because it addressed the tension many of the guards felt. Not wrong, Corporal. Evolution. The core values haven't changed: discipline, service, protection. But the way we express those values can adapt to modern circumstances. He walked over to a display board, showing historical examples of Royal Guard adaptation. Your predecessors modified their procedures when they faced new challenges, changes in technology, security threats, social expectations. This is just the latest adaptation. The afternoon training session focused on practical scenarios. Guards practiced maintaining their ceremonial posture while developing peripheral awareness of their surroundings. They learned hand signals for communicating potential problems without breaking formation, and protocols for one guard responding to an emergency while others maintained the ceremony. Marcus was impressed by how quickly the guards adapted. Their legendary discipline, which had seemed rigid and inflexible, actually provided an excellent foundation for the new protocols. They approached emergency response training with the same precision they brought to ceremonial duties. During a break, Sergeant Hayes approached Marcus privately. Corporal, can I ask you something? When you left formation to help that child, were you thinking about all of this, the protocols, the consequences, the bigger picture? Marcus considered the question carefully. Honestly, Sergeant, I wasn't thinking about any of that. I saw a scared little girl who needed help, and everything else became secondary. But that's exactly why these new protocols are important, so future guards won't have to choose between their duty and their conscience. The conversation was interrupted by Colonel Whitmore's arrival on the training ground. The guards immediately snapped to attention, their ingrained discipline evident even in casual training gear. Carry on, the colonel said, observing the training scenarios with obvious approval. Thompson, how are they progressing? Excellent, sir. These men have the fundamental discipline to handle any challenge. They just needed framework for applying that discipline to new situations. Colonel Whitmore nodded and addressed the assembled guards. What you're learning here will become standard Royal Guard training within the month. You're not just learning new skills, you're helping to define the future of one of Britain's most prestigious military units. He turned to Marcus. Thompson, you should know that requests for this training are coming in from ceremonial guards around the world. The Canadian Mounties, the Vatican Swiss Guard, even the Japanese Imperial Guard are interested in learning these protocols. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the scope of what had grown from his simple act of helping a lost child. Sir, I never imagined that helping one little girl would lead to all this. The best changes often start with the simplest actions, Colonel Whitmore replied. You acted on principle, and that action has revealed principles that others want to embrace. Later that evening, Marcus received a call from Colonel Harrison with an update that would change his life once again. Thompson, I have news from Washington, Colonel Harrison began. The Commandant of the Marine Corps has been following this situation closely. Your actions and the subsequent training program you've developed have caught the attention of military leadership at the highest levels. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. High-level attention could mean either commendation or career-ending consequences. "You're being reassigned to Marine Corps Training Command at Quantico," Colonel Harrison continued. "You'll be developing a new program called Adaptive Military Protocol, training for Marines who serve in ceremonial, diplomatic, or public-facing roles." The news was stunning. Instead of ending his career, Marcus's decision to help a crying child had led to a specialized assignment that would affect Marine training for years to come. "Sir, I don't know what to say. This is far beyond anything I expected. Thompson, the Corps has realized something important through this incident. Military excellence isn't just about following orders perfectly. It's about having the judgment to know when circumstances require adaptive thinking. You demonstrated that judgment under pressure, on an international stage, and you did it in a way that honored both Marine values and human decency." Marcus thought about the little girl in the yellow dress who had started this entire chain of events. Emma, her mother, had called her. He wondered if Emma would ever know that her tears had accidentally changed military training protocols around the world. "There's one more thing," Colonel Harrison added. "The Royal Guard has requested that you remain here for another month to complete the training program implementation. After that, you'll return to Quantico to begin developing the Marine version of these protocols." As Marcus hung up the phone, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just a few days. He had expected consequences for his actions, but not the kind that would define the rest of his military career. Outside his window, he could see Buckingham Palace illuminated against the London night sky. Somewhere in that magnificent building, protocols were being rewritten, traditions were being thoughtfully adapted, and the future of military service was being redefined, all because one Marine had decided that helping a frightened child was more important than perfect ceremonial discipline. 2 weeks after implementing the new protocols, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at his temporary quarters near Buckingham Palace. The woman standing at his door was immediately recognizable. It was Emma's mother, the tourist whose daughter Marcus had helped on that life-changing morning. "Corporal Thompson? I'm Sarah Mitchell. You helped my daughter Emma 2 weeks ago during the ceremony." She held a small package wrapped in colorful paper and smiled nervously. "I hope you don't mind me tracking you down. The palace staff helped me find you." Marcus was genuinely surprised and touched by her visit. "Mrs. Mitchell, of course I remember. How is Emma doing? I hope she wasn't too traumatized by getting lost." Sarah laughed, and the sound was warm and relieved. "That's actually why I'm here. Emma has been telling everyone about the nice soldier who helped her find Mummy. She made you something, and she's been insisting we find you to give it to you." She handed Marcus the package, which was clearly wrapped by small hands with more enthusiasm than skill. "She's been following the news stories about what happened after you helped her. Well, as much as a 4-year-old can understand, she knows that you got in trouble for helping her, and she feels bad about it." Marcus carefully unwrapped the package to find a child's drawing showing a figure in a red coat, meant to be a royal guard, standing next to a smaller figure in yellow, clearly Emma, with a big smiley face. At the bottom, in shaky letters that had obviously been helped by an adult, it read, "Thank you, Marcus." "She insisted on using your first name," Sarah explained. "She said Marcus is my friend and friends use real names. I hope that's appropriate." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "It's perfect. This means more to me than any official recognition could." Sarah's expression grew more serious. "Corporal Thompson, I need you to know something. What you did that morning, it wasn't just about helping a lost child. Emma has autism, and crowded, noisy situations can be overwhelming for her. When she got separated from us, she wasn't just scared. She was having what we call a sensory overload episode." Marcus listened intently as Sarah continued. "In that state, she couldn't have responded to loudspeakers or announcements. She needed someone to physically approach her, speak gently, and help her feel safe. If you hadn't intervened, she could have panicked and run into traffic or gotten much more seriously lost in London." The weight of this revelation settled over Marcus. His decision to help hadn't just been about comforting a crying child. He had potentially prevented a much more serious emergency. "I've been reading about the changes happening because of what you did," Sarah continued. "The new training protocols, the discussions about military flexibility and human compassion. I wanted you to know that from a parent's perspective, What you did represents everything I hope military service stands for." As they talked, Marcus learned more about Sarah's family. Her husband was deployed with the British Army in Cyprus, and she had brought Emma to London for a special mother-daughter trip. The palace tour was supposed to be the highlight of their visit, not a moment of crisis. "Emma asks about you regularly," Sarah said. "She wants to know if you're still keeping people safe. I tell her that you are, and that because of her, you're helping other soldiers learn how to keep children safe too." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sergeant Hayes, who had become Marcus's primary liaison for the training program. When he saw Sarah, his formal military bearing softened. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Sergeant Hayes. I was on duty the morning Corporal Thompson helped your daughter." He smiled genuinely. "How is little Emma?" "She's wonderful, thank you. She's actually outside with my sister. She was too shy to come up herself, but she wanted to see her soldier again." Marcus looked at Sergeant Hayes with surprise. "You knew Emma's situation?" Sergeant Hayes nodded. "I've been part of the Royal Guard for 10 years, Corporal. I've seen lost children before, but I could tell this was different. The way she was crying, the way she wasn't responding to the crowd around her. I suspected she might have special needs. But protocol demanded I maintain position." His voice carried a note of regret. "I've thought about that morning many times since then. You did what I wish I had been able to do. These new protocols we're learning, they give us permission to act on our training and our conscience." Sarah looked between the two soldiers with understanding. "You were both in an impossible situation. The important thing is that one of you found a way to do the right thing, and now you're making sure others can do the same." She turned to Marcus. "Emma is waiting outside with a small army of toy soldiers that she's been playing with. She calls them Marcus's friends and makes them help other toy children who are lost or scared. You've become her hero, and through her play she's working through what happened that day." Marcus felt deeply moved by this insight into how his actions had affected the child he'd helped. "Would it be possible for me to say hello to her? I'd love to see how she's doing." They walked outside together, where Marcus saw Emma playing on a small patch of grass near the palace grounds, supervised by a woman who was clearly her aunt. When Emma saw Marcus approaching, her face lit up with the pure joy that only children can express. "Marcus," she called out, running toward him with the complete trust and enthusiasm of a 4-year-old. "You're still here. Are you still being a good soldier?" Marcus knelt down to her level, just as he had during that memorable morning. "I'm trying my best, Emma. Are you still being brave?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Mummy says I was very brave when I got lost, and that you were brave too for helping me even when it was hard." She held up one of her toy soldiers. "This one is you. He helps all the other toys when they're scared. Do you want to play?" For the next 20 minutes, Marcus found himself engaged in an elaborate game involving toy soldiers, stuffed animals, and various rescue scenarios. Sergeant Hayes watched with amusement, as the Marine who had sparked an international incident about military protocol sat on the grass playing, with toys and completely absorbed in a child's imagination, you know. Sergeant Hayes said to Sarah as they watched, "This is exactly what the new protocols are about. Military service isn't an abstract concept. It's about real people, real situations, real humanity. Your daughter is teaching us as much as we're teaching each other." As the visit concluded, Emma hugged Marcus tightly. "Thank you for helping me, Marcus. Mummy says you're teaching other soldiers to help children too." Marcus felt the profound truth in her simple words. "You're welcome, Emma. And thank you for reminding me why we serve." After Sarah and Emma left, Marcus and Sergeant Hayes walked back toward the palace in thoughtful silence. Finally, Sergeant Hayes spoke. "Corporal, I have to tell you something. When I first heard about these new protocols, I was skeptical. The Royal Guard's traditions felt sacred to me. But seeing you with that little girl today, understanding what your intervention really meant, I realized that our traditions are strongest when they serve their true purpose." Marcus nodded, still processing the emotional impact of learning how his actions had affected Emma and her family. "Sergeant, I think the most important thing I've learned from all this is that military discipline and human compassion don't have to be opposites. They can actually strengthen each other." As they approached the palace gates, both men understood that they had witnessed something profound, not just the resolution of a protocol violation, but a demonstration of how military service at its best creates connections between those who serve and those they protect that last far beyond any single moment of crisis. 6 months later, Marcus stood before an audience of military leaders from 12 nations at the International Military Protocol Conference in Washington, D.C. The auditorium was filled with generals, colonels, and senior officers representing some of the world's most elite military units. The topic of his presentation: Adaptive Military Protocol, Balancing Tradition with Human-Centered Service. The journey from that morning at Buckingham Palace to this international stage had been remarkable. The protocols Marcus had helped develop with the Royal Guard had been implemented successfully, and requests for similar training had come from military organizations around the world. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of his audience. "6 months ago, I made a decision that violated centuries of military protocol. Today I want to share what that decision taught us about the true meaning of military service." Behind him, a large screen displayed the now famous photograph of him kneeling beside Emma outside Buckingham Palace. The image had become a symbol of the debate between rigid adherence to rules and compassionate leadership. This photograph represents a moment of choice that every service member faces at some point in their career, the choice between following protocol and following conscience. What we discovered through the events that followed is that this doesn't have to be an either-or decision. In the audience, Marcus could see Colonel Whitmore, who had flown in from London specifically for this presentation. Beside him sat Colonel Harrison, now Marcus's commanding officer at Quantico. Their presence gave him confidence as he continued. "The Royal Guard's new adaptive protocol training has been in effect for 6 months. During that time, Guards have successfully assisted in 12 emergency situations without compromising their ceremonial duties. These included medical emergencies, lost children, and security concerns. In each case, the Guards' ability to respond appropriately actually enhanced public confidence in the institution, rather than diminishing it." Marcus clicked to the next slide, showing statistics from tourist feedback and media coverage. "Public approval of the Royal Guard has increased by 37% since implementing these protocols. People don't see the Guards as less disciplined. They see them as more human, more relevant, and more worthy of respect." General Patricia Williams, the Marine Corps Commandant, raised her hand from the front row. "Corporal Thompson, how do you respond to critics who argue that any flexibility in military protocol opens the door to arbitrary decision-making and erosion of discipline?" It was a question Marcus had anticipated, having heard it many times over the past months. "Ma'am, that's exactly why these protocols require extensive training. We're not advocating for arbitrary rule-breaking. We're providing structured guidelines for making ethical decisions under pressure. The training teaches service members to evaluate situations quickly and respond appropriately while maintaining their core military values." Admiral James Roberts from the Naval Academy leaned forward. "Can you give us specific examples of how this training differs from traditional military instruction?" Marcus switched to a slide showing training scenarios. Traditional military training often focuses on following orders precisely under any circumstances. Adaptive protocol training adds a layer of ethical decision-making. Service members learn to ask, does this situation involve immediate danger to human life? Does my response align with the fundamental values my military service represents? Will my action ultimately honor or dishonor the institution I serve? He paused, making eye contact with various officers in the audience. "We're not changing military discipline. We're making it more sophisticated. We're training thinking soldiers, not just obedient ones." The presentation continued with case studies from different military contexts where adaptive protocols had been successfully implemented. Marcus shared stories from the Vatican Swiss Guard, who had developed protocols for responding to medical emergencies during papal audiences, and from the Canadian Mounted Police, who had adapted their ceremonial procedures to better serve Indigenous communities during official events. "The common thread in all these implementations," Marcus explained, "is that they strengthen rather than weaken military tradition. When service members understand the values behind their protocols, they can uphold those values even when circumstances require adaptation." During the question and answer period, Colonel Chen from the Chinese People's Liberation Army asked, "Corporal Thompson, how do you ensure that individual soldiers don't use these protocols as justification for simply doing whatever they want?" Marcus appreciated the directness of the question. "Sir, That's why the training emphasizes values-based decision-making rather than personal preference. A soldier following adaptive protocols must be able to articulate how their actions serve the mission and honor their service. If they can't make that case, they're not following the protocols, they're just breaking rules. As the formal presentation concluded, Marcus was approached by numerous officers interested in implementing similar training in their own organizations. The conversation that had started with one crying child in London was now spreading to military institutions worldwide. Later that evening, at a reception for conference attendees, Marcus found himself in conversation with a group of international officers. Major Sarah Kim from the South Korean Army asked him about something he hadn't expected. "Corporal Thompson, I've been following your story since it first appeared in the news. My question isn't about military protocol, it's about personal growth. How has this experience changed you as a person?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Major Kim, 6 months ago I thought military service was about perfect execution of orders. I've learned that it's actually about perfect execution of values. That's a much more complex challenge, but it's also much more meaningful." Colonel Whitmore joined their conversation, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thompson, I wanted to share something with you. Last week, the Queen asked me to pass along a message. She said that your actions reminded the entire institution that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest courage is risking everything to do what's right." The reception continued with discussions about implementation timelines, training resources, and the challenges of changing institutional culture. Marcus realized that his story had become larger than himself. It was now part of a global conversation about the evolution of military service in the modern world. As the evening concluded, Marcus stepped outside onto the conference center's terrace overlooking the Potomac River. The lights of Washington, D.C. reflected off the water, and he could see the illuminated monuments that represented the values he had sworn to defend. His phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Mitchell, Emma's mother. It was a photo of Emma, now 5 years old, wearing a small military cap and saluting with serious concentration. The message read, "Emma wanted to show you her soldier salute. She still talks about her friend Marcus and says she wants to help people like you do." Marcus smiled, understanding that this simple message captured the real meaning of everything that had happened. It wasn't about breaking protocols or changing institutions. It was about the connections between those who serve and those they protect, and the responsibility that comes with wearing the uniform. His decision to help a crying child had taught him, and apparently the military world, that true discipline isn't about blindly following rules. It's about having the wisdom to know when rules serve their purpose and the courage to act when they don't. It's about understanding that military service, at its core, is about serving humanity, and that sometimes serving humanity requires the strength to challenge the very systems designed to create that service. As Marcus looked out over the capital city, he felt grateful for the path his career had taken. He had learned that being a good soldier doesn't mean never questioning orders. It means having the character to question them thoughtfully, the wisdom to act righteously, and the courage to accept the consequences of doing what's right. The little girl in the yellow dress had accidentally taught the world something important about military service, leadership, and the balance between tradition and compassion. And Marcus Thompson, the Marine who had risked everything to help her, had become the messenger for a lesson that would influence military training for generations to come.